Several weeks ago, February 12th to be exact, as Washington, D.C. at that time was braced for a snowstorm and the Senate rushed to finish its business before the President's Day recess, the senior senator from Arkansas came to the floor to offer a unanimous consent request to confirm a district court judge for his state. Before he made the request, I spoke with that senator, who, to his credit, was one of only 3 Democrats to vote against the so-called nuclear option the month before in November. Although I was sympathetic to his desire to see his home state judge confirmed, I objected to his request to bypass the procedure the majority adopted in November, including recorded cloture and confirmation votes. I did so based on principle. I did so because after 52 Democrats voted to strip we Republicans in the minority from our rights, the very least we could do is to ask the majority to utilize the procedure that they voted to adopt. After all, the simple fact of the matter is that the minority can no longer stop nominees. That's the result of the nuclear option. And that was, of course, the whole point that the majority had when it acted back in November. So the senator from Arkansas offered his unanimous consent request, and I withheld my consent. We had our exchange on the floor, but we did so courteously, and that's what senators should do. Later that evening, the majority leader came to the floor, made another unanimous consent request. Senator Cornyn objected for the same reason that I had. Thereafter, the majority leader exercised the power that he has, he alone possesses it, to move these judges and filed cloture on 4 district court nominees. That set up several votes for last Monday evening. That evening, during our side's hour of debate time, and that's all we have anymore for district court judges, 1 hour of debate time on each side, I spoke on the current state of the Senate with respect to the legislative process. I spoke about how our founding fathers intended the Senate to operate. I spoke how the Senate used to operate, how it should operate, and sadly, how it does the opposite. I spoke about how the majority leader routinely files cloture on bills before debate has even begun. I spoke about how in today's Senate, in what is supposed to be the world's greatest deliberative body, United States senators from great states all over this nation are shut out of the process of legislating, sometimes even debating. As our side's hour of debate time neared its end, the distinguished chairman of our committee asked if I would yield him a few minutes of our time. I have, of course, agreed to extend him that courtesy. I extended him the courtesy even though I knew he'd use that time to argue against everything I just said. I extended him the courtesy because I know he'd do the same for me. And as a matter of fact, he has done exactly that same thing for me. That's the United States Senate. We're courteous to each other even when we disagree. As I said, that was Monday night, 8 days ago. On Tuesday morning, we had a series of stacked votes related to those district court nominees. We had several cloture votes, as well as confirmation votes. I voted against cloture, along with many of my colleagues. I don't presume to speak for many of my colleagues or any of my colleagues, but I voted against cloture to register my objection to a process arrived at via brutal force, in other words, by the action of the nuclear option. But the majority leader wasn't content to simply use the procedures he led his caucus to adopt last November when the nuclear option was adopted, when the minority rights on judges was taken away. He wanted voice votes rather than recorded votes on those lifetime appointments. And I emphasize lifetime appointments, so they deserve serious consideration. At that point, I objected, and I exercised the right of a United States Senator to ask for a roll call vote of yeas and nays. I supported each of the nominees on final confirmation. Some of my colleagues opposed them. But even if the votes had been unanimous, the right to demand a recorded vote is one of the most basic and fundamental rights of any U.S. senator. There is absolutely nothing wrong with exercising that right, especially when it comes to approving lifetime appointments to the courts. Before we had that recorded vote, I took the opportunity to remind my colleagues of how well this president is doing with respect to getting his judges that he nominates confirmed by the United States Senate. Specifically, that thus far, this Congress, we've confirmed 50 of President Obama's judicial nominees. By way of comparison, at this point in President Bush's second term, we'd only confirmed 21 judicial nominees. That's 50 for President Obama, 21 for President Bush. Those numbers compare both district and circuit nominations. That's a benchmark both sides typically use. So why are we Republicans blamed by Democrats for not approving judges, especially when over the course of 5 years and 2 months now, we've approved 223 judges and only disapproved 2. Those are basic, unassailable facts. In response, the Majority Leader described our request for recorded votes, as I was talking about 8 days ago, as, quote, a waste of taxpayers' time, end of quote. And then he concluded his brief remarks by saying this, quote, I would suggest that my friend, the senior senator from Iowa, that he not believe his own words because they're simply not true, end of quote. That was on Tuesday, a week ago. 2 days later, on Thursday evening, the Majority Leader came to the floor, proffered a unanimous consent request for several district court judges. Senator Moran was on the floor at the time and objected for our side. Thereafter, the Majority Leader filed cloture on 4 district court judges and the nominees to lead the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. That's a right that the Majority Leader has under our rules. A few minutes later, the Majority Leader returned to the floor so he could, as he described, quote, say a few words about the man who does all of the objection around here, or a lot of the objecting, end of quote. Then he proceeded to quote extensively from a speech that I delivered in 2005. He then accused me of violating senatorial courtesy during floor consideration of the immigration bill because I objected to consideration of amendments approved by the Democrats without assurances that we could vote on the amendments and members on my side, thought we had a right to offer, as any senator should have a right to offer amendments. Now, even if some of the amendments the Democrats wanted had bipartisan support, I was a senator standing up and defending the right of our members to offer amendments, even controversial amendments. To be clear, I was prepared to vote on any Democrat amendment, provided the Republican amendments were not restricted. The Majority Leader then concluded his highly discourteous remarks by saying this, quote, the senior senator from Iowa, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, and the people of Iowa should check this out. They should see what he says and what he does, end of quote. Given how inappropriate these remarks were and that they were roughly coincided with several other inappropriate comments the Majority Leader made last week, I feel compelled to respond, and of course that's what I'm doing. Let me start by reviewing briefly how we arrived where we are today. As I said, the Majority Leader quoted from a speech that I delivered in 2005. For the benefit of my colleagues who weren't here at the time, That was back when the Democrats were indiscriminately filibustering a host of President Bush's highly qualified nominees for the circuit courts. And make no mistake, the Democrats were utilizing the filibuster on judges at that time to an extent never witnessed before in our nation's history. During this time, they were filibustering 10 different circuit court nominees. So like I said, the majority leader quoted from a speech that I delivered during the debate, May 23, 2005. What he failed to mention is that 6 days later, on May 17, 2005, he said this on the Senate floor regarding the nuclear option. Quote, "It appears that the majority leader," referring to then Majority Leader Senator Frist, "cannot accept any solution which does not guarantee all current and future judicial nominees an up or down vote. That result is unacceptable to me because it is inconsistent with the Constitution checks and balances. It would essentially eliminate the role of the Senate minority in confirming judicial nominations and turn the Senate into a rubber stamp for the president's choices," end of quote. Now, I'm not going to relitigate that fight today, except to say this. At the time, Republicans, myself among them, were arguing those nominees should be afforded an up or down vote. But as the quotation I just read demonstrates, Democrats refused. At the end of the day, our side lost that debate. We didn't believe judicial nominees should be subjected to a 60-vote threshold, but nor did we believe that we should play by two sets of rules. So when the roles were reversed and there was a Democrat in the White House, Republicans utilized the tool as the Democrats did. The only difference was that we used it much, much more sparingly. As I said, we've approved 223 Obama nominees to the courts and only disapproved 2. But the Democrats, of course, didn't like being treated to the tactics that they had pioneered, so they began to threaten to utilize the so-called nuclear option. A lot of negotiations ensued between our side and the majority leader. That's the way the Senate most often will get things done, negotiate to a consensus. Again, I'm not going to review every detail, but as any member of this body can tell you, the results of those negotiations was this: the minority, this time the Republicans, relinquished certain rights regarding nominations. Did it by negotiation. For instance, district court nominations used to be subject to 30 hours of debate. They're now subject to only 2 hours. In exchange for relinquishing those rights, the majority leader of the United States Senate gave his word that he would oppose any effort to use the nuclear option. On January 27, 2011, the majority leader said this on the Senate floor, quote, "I will oppose any effort in this Congress or the next to change the Senate rules other than through regular order," end of quote. Notwithstanding that promise at the beginning of the next Congress, we were once again on the receiving end of threats regarding the nuclear option. And once again on January 24, 2013, after lots of negotiations, the majority leader again gave his commitment. Here's what he said on the floor of this chamber, quote, "Any other resolutions related to Senate procedure would be subject to a regular order process, including consideration by the Rules Committee," end of quote. That commitment mattered. It mattered to me. It mattered to my colleagues. We as a minority relinquished certain rights. In exchange for extinguishing those rights, we received a commitment from the majority leader of the United States Senate. And remember, my colleagues, please, this is the United States Senate. Not only are we courteous to one another, we keep our word. 10 months after making that commitment on November 21st, 2013, the majority leader and 51 other Democrats voted to invoke the nuclear option. They chose to adopt a new set of procedures for confirming judges. So that is how we got where we are today. And yet, 3 months later, when the minority has the audacity to insist that the majority utilize the procedures they voted to adopt, the majority leader comes to the floor to level an ad hominem attack. Amazingly, given the commitments he made at the beginning of the last Congress, he accuses me of speaking out of both sides of my mouth. The fact of the matter is there is absolutely nothing wrong with demanding debate time and roll call votes, especially on lifetime appointments to the judiciary, and especially after the majority chose to adopt these very procedures just last November. That's not a waste of taxpayers' money, as the majority leader called it. It's representative government. And while I'm on the floor of the Senate, while I'm on the subject of floor procedure, let me say this about the legislative process that we've been following on the floor. I spoke at length on this subject a week ago yesterday. Just as I have on several other occasions, I've been highly critical of the process we follow these days on the floor. But I've always tried to avoid making my criticisms personal. I've always tried to be courteous. But there is no getting around this fact. It's nothing short of a travesty that great senators from all over the nation must go to the majority leader to ask permission to offer amendments. Proud senators from proud states, Republican senators and Democratic senators, conservative senators, liberal senators, Northerners and Southerners, appropriators and authorizers, hawks and doves. All of these senators have been reduced to this. They're forced to come before one individual on bended knee to ask permission to offer an amendment. That is not as it should be in the world's greatest deliberative body, the United States Senate. So am I highly critical of the legislative process we undergo on the floor? Absolutely I am. But I didn't criticize the majority leader in a personal or discourteous way. I didn't accuse him of, quote, talking out of both sides of his mouth, end of quote, as he did this senator. I wasn't attacking him personally. I was defending the rights of 99 other senators as well as my own rights as a senator. And what exactly is a majority leader afraid of anyway? Taking a few hard votes? We're paid to take hard votes. We're sent here to exercise our best judgment on behalf of our constituents. That's how our republic is designed. It does not have to be that way. Consider how amendments are handled in the Judiciary Committee as an example, something that ought to be followed here in the United States Senate. Our chairman, I should say the senior senator of this body, the President pro tem, Senator Leahy, our chairman does not tell us on the minority Republicans or even the Democrats what we're allowed to offer, nor does he tell us how many amendments we're allowed to offer. He controls the agenda, as you would expect a chairman to do, but we get to offer amendments. And as a result, every single senator of our committee, whether they like it or not, contributes to the process. The chairman controls the agenda. The minority offers amendments, and the majority has to vote on those amendments. That happens to be the process. That's what happens when you have a chairman who respects the rights of United States senators. There is absolutely no reason that we couldn't do exactly that same thing right here on the floor of the United States Senate. Now, let me mention one other thing about what the majority leader said the other night, because I found it particularly offensive. Immediately after accusing me of, quote unquote, talking out of both sides of my mouth, the majority leader suggested that the people of Iowa, my constituents, should pay attention to what I say and what I do. Well, they do. But let me relate something to my colleagues. about how I keep in touch with Iowans. The people of Iowa know who they elected to the Senate. They know that ever since I was first sworn in this body in January 1981, I have fought all day, every day to represent them. I know my constituents, they know me. I go to constituent meetings in every county, every one of 99 counties every year. Now multiply that 99 by 32 years and you get a fairly large number. I've been in 25 counties so far this year. So I talk to my constituents. I read their mail. I know, for instance, how hard Obamacare has been on families in my state. So I find it personally offensive for the majority leader to come to the floor, as he did last Wednesday, and accuse Americans, including my constituents, of telling lies when they share their stories about how Obamacare is impacting them. So last Thursday evening, the majority leader came to the floor so he could, as he described it, quote, say a few words about the man who does all the objecting around here. Well, Mr. President, do I object? You bet I do. So do the rest of my committee members on the Judiciary Committee when it comes to things of the Judiciary Committee. So does the rest of our caucus. We object to the authoritarian way this Senate is being run. We object to being shut out of the legislative process. We object to dismissing constituent stories of Obamacare as lies. We object to taking to the floor of the United States Senate to attack fellow citizens as un-American because they have the audacity to exercise First Amendment rights. And yes, we object to the discourteous ad hominem attacks on Senate colleagues because they choose to exercise their right to demand roll call votes on lifetime appointments. It should stop. The Senate should return to being the greatest deliberative body in the world. I yield the floor.